Hello and welcome to the Free IP Fandom. I'm your host, Felix Chaplin, and this is a re-upload of my interview with Sarah Moyer, which was originally posted in March of 2022. As usual, I'd like to start with a song.
I just had a row with a telephone girl, my brain's in a whirl. I asked her for Ipswich, but she lost her head, and somehow she switched me on Northwich instead. She got so mixed up with the switches, it's true, that I got annoyed and I cried, tell me, do, which switch is the switch miss for Ipswich? It's the Ipswich which I require. Which switch is Ipswich with this switch? You switched my switch on the wrong wire. You've switched me on Northwich, not Ipswich. So now to prevent further hitch, if you'll tell me which switch is Northwich and which switch is Ipswich, I'll know which switch is which. I begged the young lady to please put me through. I cried, switch me, do, on Ipswich too. I waited an hour, then the sweet little thing came back from her lunch and exclaimed, did you ring? And just as I fancied at last I was through, she cried, have you finished? I said, what the who? Which switch is the switch miss for Ipswich? It's the Ipswich which I require. Which switch is Ipswich with this switch? You switched my switch on the wrong wire. You've switched me on Northwich, not Ipswich. So now to prevent further hitch, if you'll tell me which switch is Northwich and which switch is Ipswich, I'll know which switch is which. I got through at last and I thought all was well. Rang up my hotel, but more trouble fell. I cried, can you book me a room there for two? A voice said, we can, sir, but this is the zoo. I murmured a prayer, then I fainted away, and when I came round I was trying to say, which switch is the switch miss for Ipswich? It's the Ipswich which I require. Which switch is Ipswich with this switch? You switched my switch on the wrong wire. You've switched me on Northwich, not Ipswich. So now to prevent further hitch, if you'll tell me which switch is Northwich and which switch is Ipswich, I'll know which switch is which.
The song you just heard was Which Switch is the Switch Miss for Ipswich, written by Herman Daruski, Wharton David, and Jay Barnett, and sung by friend of the show, Sarah Moyer. What does this song have to do with today's episode? Stay tuned to find out. When I started making this podcast, I did so with the intention of breathing new life into creative works that have been largely forgotten. On this journey into the public domain, I have met some incredible like-minded individuals that have chosen to support my efforts. In today's episode, I have the honor of interviewing one such individual. It is with great pleasure that I introduce today's guest, Sarah Moyer.
Hi, Felix.
Tell us a bit about your background as a singer.
Sure. So I grew up in a very musical family, and my parents are both musicians. My brothers have always done music as a hobby, and my parents really just kind of pushed me into being a performing artist. And by the time I was in 8th grade, I knew I wanted to be an opera singer. I don't think a lot of 8th graders think about that, but I went on to study at Oklahoma State University for my undergrad and fell in love with chamber music rather than opera. So I got involved in that and really fell in love with all types of chamber music, everything from early music that was written before Mozart was alive to music that's being written today. And so it really is, in a very generic term, it's classical, the classical genre. And then I ended up moving out to Massachusetts, and I went to grad school out there, went to New England Conservatory, got my master's degree out there, and stayed out there for 12 years as I built my career in being a chamber artist. And I now travel full-time for all of my work. I sing in a lot of professional choral ensembles, and I also sing along with different orchestras regionally and throughout the country. So yeah, it's it's a pretty awesome career. And I wouldn't change it for the world. It's very hard, but it's really wonderful.
That sounds fantastic. Judging by your classical background, it seems like you've been pretty immersed in public domain music for a long time.
That's probably makes up at least 3/4 of the music that I sing, yes, if not more. So yes, I'm very familiar with public domain music, and I'm very familiar on where to find it too. There are so many resources that I think people don't really know about, and so I know where to find it, and I love that there's just so much of it to go around. It's really exciting, and every time that Public Domain Day comes out, the first of every year, I get really excited that more comes into the public domain.
That's what I like to hear. I took a look at your website before reaching out to you, and your biography page says that you've been spending your time in quarantine trying to revive Tin Pan Alley songs. That's a pretty big change from chamber music. How did you get started with that?
Well, in 2019, we went on our my husband and I went on our honeymoon to Hawaii. And we knew when we were going to go, our goal was to pick up an ukulele. We knew that we wanted to bring one back with us. Whatever we ended up doing there, that was a goal to bring one back. And so we went to the Polynesian Cultural Center and we bought an ukulele there in Oahu. And we brought it back, and of course we fiddled around with it. But I'm not really, besides piano, I don't really play any other instruments. So we just kind of fiddled around with it, no pun intended. And then in about January of 2020, I learned a couple songs because I got a songbook for Christmas. And the first song I ever learned was Are You Lonesome Tonight by Roy Turk and Lou Handman, written I think in 1926. I recorded it, and I recorded a couple of other songs just on my iPhone for fun. And then I went away for about an 8-week-long tour. And during that time, COVID was getting pretty out of hand, and then about mid-tour, one of my gigs was cut short and everyone ended up going home, and that was like the day that I came home for however long we were home. And so I remember I posted this video of Are You Lonesome Tonight, me just playing it horribly on the couch, onto Facebook. And so I got so much incredible feedback from people saying, you should do this more frequently. This is like really great niche for you. I think you've nailed it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm home now. I'm home for however long. I'm going to start learning all of these songs from this songbook. And so I started learning them. And over time, I was realizing that when I was finding these songs in this songbook, I was like, oh my gosh, I've grown up with half of these songs. I know them already. Why not just focus on this? I love this music so much. These are songs that I sang when I was a kid because my parents introduced them to me. We had an old Hammond organ. It was an electric organ in our living room that we had when I was growing up. On the autoplay, it would play some of these fun songs like In the Good Old Summertime, and it would play Let Me Call You Sweetheart. All of the schmaltzy waltzes, it would play all of those fun songs. Shine on Harvest Moon was on there. Sharing them with people in a world where they probably have never heard these songs. A lot of people my age don't know this music, actually. So it's nice to get it out there and bring new life to it.
I see. So you already had some familiarity with these songs for most of your life. Was there anything interesting that you found when revisiting these songs?
So over time, I was playing, all these wonderful pieces, and I started realizing that I was just playing the choruses, not the verses. And so I started diving in and finding the actual sources. And there's a lot of times we know the choruses to all these songs, but we don't know the verses. So I got involved in and interested in learning the verses to these pieces. And in the process, I joined a Facebook group. It's called Ukulele Music, the Early 1900s Tin Pan Alley. And it's a group of incredible humans. We're learning from each other, and there's like a monthly theme. I think like next month's theme is songs with the word blue in it. So there's always fun themes, and so that also encourages us to learn and discover new pieces that fit certain themes.
When you said songs with blue in the title, the first thing that came to mind was Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and now I'm very curious about how that would sound on a ukulele.
Oh man, that would be amazing. I don't know if I'm at that level yet. And I'll say that as a professional singer who sings, classically daily, every single day for her job, singing the Tin Pan Alley music during the pandemic when I wasn't able to perform live, it really kept me in a lot of vocal health, actually. It kept me in good shape. It kept my artistry in good shape. It really kept me in check, and I thought that was really cool. I didn't expect that from singing popular music, but it really helped out, especially singing Irving Berlin, right? Like, Irving Berlin is so classical. classically based. And that's one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of these songs is that in the genre itself, we're looking at late 1800s, early 1900s. The beginning of Tin Pan Alley is really kind of meshed in with the concept of parlor music. People in the 1800s and before would sit around their spinet in their living room and they would sing their popular music at the time, whatever that might be, Schubert or Mendelssohn. They'd be sitting there singing these beautiful songs, and that morphed into the popular music into the late 1800s. The parlor music is still sung with a very classical approach because everyone in the 1800s is still, trying to achieve this beautiful bel canto sound. So popular music, the concept was still very classical, still very bel canto, and it wasn't really until we get into probably the 30s, maybe 40s, a little later, that you start to hear more jazzy sounds in these songs. And we only know that by the few recordings we have, right? There's like so few recordings compared to what we have today. And so I feel like one of the things that I really try to do in singing these songs is bring a more classical approach to it, because I do believe that the vocal quality and the vocal intention in the early 1900s was still the idea that you sing this the way that, your voice teacher would teach you this in your vocal lessons. And so I'm trying to bring it to make it as true as possible or as historically accurate as possible as far as vocal quality is concerned, even though I know that the more popularized versions have become more jazzy and have become more approachable, I would say, to an amateur singer.
I'm really learning a lot from this conversation. Has your experience with researching these songs changed how you look at music and history?
A little, I would say, yes. It's interesting. Times change and social issues change, and things that people wrote about back then are sometimes not okay, or are oftentimes not okay. So I do find that a lot, actually. Looking back and trying, like, for instance, I'm really trying to find wonderful music by Black composers right now. I know Bob Cole is incredible, but one of the hardest issues that I have in finding Black composers is that a lot of their music was written for minstrel shows, and it wasn't because they wanted to write it for minstrel shows. It's because they had to write it for minstrel shows. Otherwise, no one would hire them. And so trying to find and share music by Black composers, for instance, is really hard, because I want to share their music, but I also don't want to share the music that was, made in a derogatory way. But Bob Cole is a good example of someone who was like, oh, heck no, I'm not doing that. I'm definitely going to write songs for myself and for the audiences. I'm going to educate my audiences. And that's exactly what he did. And he's got some beautiful songs out there. I do need to be introduced to other composers. I just haven't been able to find them yet. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places yet. But that, and along with some other things, there are a lot of songs that, while some are fun and playful, they can also be very sexual and like non-consensual as well. So I have, you're trying to find, where's the line? Where do you find that? Oftentimes, actually, when you are looking at some of these originals, if you just look at the front page, you can often tell if it's going to be appropriate or not to sing, which is very interesting. That you in this situation, you often can judge a book by its cover. Yeah, so I've found that it's definitely opened my mind to that was a different time, and it's definitely something that I think music has totally improved on, and society has totally improved on since then, and we still have a lot more to improve on as well. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. In my own experience researching these songs, I found that a lot of racial slurs are used really casually in the lyrics. I've also found that even being exposed to a lot of these songs doesn't make it any less jarring to hear them when they're used. Even when you factor in that it was a different time, I just can't wrap my head around why they felt the need to include those slurs in the first place. Like, they don't add anything to the songs. While this song hasn't entered the public domain yet, I remember hearing some early recordings of Cole Porter's song Let's Do It, and just like most recordings from around this general time period, the first half was instrumental, and I was getting really into it, and then when they started singing, they said 2 racial slurs in the very first line, so that was pretty crazy.
Right. And what could be a fantastic tune, and you're going along and you're like, this is a great song, and then all of a sudden you hit this part, like a measure, that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this song. Thanks, buddy. Like, this is stupid. Why did you write this in here? It was going so well. So yeah, it's been very eye-opening, and so eye-opening too, that like, as an artist, I like to think that artists, and maybe I'm just naive, but as an artist, I like to think that artists are so, socially aware. And that's not the case. And, I think also these composers might have been, I don't know what they were thinking at that time. Have no clue. And it does bother me too. I love, Cole Porter. He's amazing. And then to know that something like that he would write, you wonder what on earth were you thinking and what made this okay at that time, Well, even Irving Berlin is a good example. He was wonderful, but he did do a lot of minstrel things, or had a lot of minstrel connotations in his music. Mandy is a good example, It's just somebody who you idolize completely, and then you're like, wait, you wrote this? Oh, no. So.
What is your favorite song that you've recorded?
I really enjoyed learning and playing Which Switch is the Switch Miss for Ipswich. That one was published in 1915 by Daruski, David, and Barnett. And I just like it because I enjoy fun, quirky things. And that's a very quirky song. And I would say anything that I've sung by Berlin is really just some of my favorite stuff.
I was kind of surprised by the amount of songs that were about phones from the 1890s and 1900s.
It was such a hot thing, right? Like the phone was such an important part of of history right at that point in time.
Hello, My Baby is another really iconic phone song. Most people today, myself included, associate it with that one Merry Melodies cartoon with the singing frog. You can imagine how surprised I was to find out how racist the original version is.
Right. I actually was like, oh, I'm totally going to record that. And then I went to go look at the words. And again, I was like, I'm not going to record this. Not happening.
Something that really gets to me is that there are so many good songs from the 1900s that were never recorded, and a lot of the recordings that were made are now lost. So it's pretty great that you've been recording a lot of these really old, obscure songs.
So many. Oh my goodness. Yes. So speaking of things that we've lost, though, I cannot seem to find, and I know that there is one that exists, but I recorded a piece. Let me figure it out real quick. It is, it's Falling Star. It's by Nora Bayes and Jack Norworth, and I couldn't find a recording of it to save my life. I know that there's one that exists in history, but I think it's probably down deep in a vault somewhere in some library, and you'd have to go through WorldCat or something like that to get to it. So, but I couldn't find an audio recording of it at all. So I recorded that, knowing full well that there's not one to my knowledge that exists or is available to anybody, which is really exciting. But there's a lot of these other waltzes that I'm finding mostly the things that were written in the late 1800s and we're talking 1895 to maybe 1910. A lot of those things weren't recorded, particularly the ones that were waltzes, basically. And so those are things that I've really found that I love singing as well, because they're waltzes. They're more on the classical side of things, so they fit my voice really well. And I like the fact that no one has recorded it, and so it needs to be out there somewhere. But it is interesting that we're talking about all of this, because as we're talking about what's good and what's bad in the repertoire, there are sometimes just dumb songs. They're not good. And I can understand why they didn't make it, I can understand why they're not performed, just because they are quite dull or they're just not worth it. But then again, to one person it might be great, and to another person it might not. But that's what I'm finding with a lot of these waltzes, is that they're just kind of being overlooked because they're not great. But I've found some beautiful ones that do need to be recorded. So yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because so many things are not recorded because it just was a time where, recording was so brand new.
Absolutely. Do you have any upcoming projects we should look out for?
As far as Tin Pan Alley is concerned, I'm actually going to be recording a good amount of songs very soon to release as I do slowly, because I travel everywhere. I don't really have time to do recordings when I'm on the road. And unfortunately, while the ukulele is technically a travel instrument, but it's still too big to fit in my suitcase. So I'm about to start recording probably about 15 or 16 pieces to release over time. And classically, I have a lot of things going on. One of the things I'm very excited about is doing Bach's St. John Passion the weekend of March 26th and 27th with the Colorado Bach Ensemble. So yeah, those are some things I'm excited about. Also, listeners are interested in the chamber world that I'm a part of, there are some incredible organizations or choirs that I'm a part of. One of them is called Skylark Ensemble. There's Seraphic Fire. There is Santa Fe Desert Chorale. There's Conspirare and True Concord. The list goes on. There's so many amazing ones. Skylark, which is an organization near and dear to my heart, we just got our third Grammy nomination. And so we'll be for an album called It's a Long Way. So that will be presented at the Grammys coming up. I forget when the rescheduled date is, but it was rescheduled due to COVID. And we have another album that just came out called A Christmas Carol, which is a storytelling album that is basically Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol set to music. So check out Skylark on Spotify and all the other amazing organizations I listed. And yeah, that's what's going on in my life.
All of that sounds amazing. Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
That's all the time we have for today's episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and don't forget to check out the links in the description to keep up with everything that Sarah Moyer is up to. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you'll come back next time for more free IP.